What if the greatest obstacle standing between you and your full potential isn't external circumstance, but the person staring back at you in the mirror? If you find value in the insights shared in this video, you can purchase David Goggins' complete book, Can't Hurt Me. Master your mind and defy the odds through the link in our description below. In a world overflowing with self-help advice promising easy paths to success, one man's raw, unflinching story stands apart, not just for its brutal honesty, but for the radical methodology it presents for completely transforming your life through deliberate suffering and relentless self-accountability. This is the message at the heart of David Goggins' powerful memoir, Can't Hurt Me, a book that has resonated with millions of readers seeking more than comfortable platitudes and quick fixes. The journey Goggins shares begins in a place few of us can imagine. Born into an abusive household, he endured a childhood marred by violence, racism, and grinding poverty. By his own account, the young Goggins was on track to become another tragic statistic, an overweight, academically struggling young man with a victim mentality and little prospect for a meaningful future. His early years were defined not by ambition, but by survival, learning to navigate a hostile environment while developing defense mechanisms that would later prove difficult to dismantle. What makes Goggins' story remarkable isn't just how far he had fallen, but the extraordinary heights he would eventually reach. From these unimaginable beginnings, he transformed himself into an elite Navy SEAL, one of the few people to complete Army Ranger School, an Air Force tactical air controller, and eventually one of the world's premier ultramarathon runners and endurance athletes. His accomplishments include completing over 60 ultra-distance races, multiple 100-plus mile races, numerous pull-up world records, and feats of endurance that most would consider superhuman. But Can't Hurt Me isn't simply a catalog of achievements designed to impress. It's a brutally honest examination of the mindset and methodology that enabled this transformation. The book's central thesis revolves around what Goggins calls callousing your mind, developing mental toughness through deliberately seeking out suffering and pushing far beyond what others consider reasonable limits. This philosophy stands in stark contrast to contemporary wellness culture that often emphasizes comfort, self-care, and work-life balance. Goggins' approach begins with radical self-accountability, a concept he introduces through what he calls the accountability mirror. Early in his transformation journey, profoundly dissatisfied with his life trajectory, Goggins began having brutally honest conversations with himself while looking in the mirror. Rather than offering self-compassion or excuses, he confronted himself with unvarnished truth about his circumstances and the role his own choices played in creating them. This practice of ruthless self-evaluation forms the foundation of Goggins' methodology. He argues that most people live in a perpetual comfort zone, avoiding hard truths about themselves and their shortcomings. By contrast, he advocates unflinchingly identifying your weaknesses, insecurities, and failures, not to wallow in them, but to create a clear-eyed starting point for transformation. This accountability becomes the catalyst for change, providing both direction and motivation for the difficult work ahead. The second core element of Goggins' philosophy is what he calls the 40% rule. Drawing from his experience in military training and extreme endurance events, he argues that when most people believe they've reached their limit, physically, mentally, or emotionally, they've actually only tapped into about 40% of their true capacity. The remaining 60% remains untouched, accessible only to those willing to push past the initial barriers of pain, discomfort, and the mind's insistence that you've reached your maximum. This concept fundamentally challenges how most people understand their capabilities. Goggins doesn't just suggest we have more in the tank than we realize. He insists that we're barely scratching the surface of our potential, living at a fraction of our capacity because we've been conditioned to retreat at the first sign of serious discomfort. The 40% rule isn't just motivational rhetoric. It's a direct challenge to reconsider what impossible really means on a personal level. To access this untapped potential, Goggins introduces the concept of callousing the mind. Just as physical calluses develop on hands through repeated friction and stress, eventually creating toughened skin that can withstand previously painful stimuli, Goggins argues the mind can be similarly toughened through deliberate exposure to discomfort and challenge. This mental callousing process transforms what once seemed unbearable into something manageable, gradually expanding your capacity for difficulty and stress. The practical application of this concept involves deliberately seeking out challenging situations rather than avoiding them. Goggins recommends intentionally doing things that make you uncomfortable on a regular basis, whether that's pre-dawn workouts, cold showers, fasting, or taking on projects that intimidate you. Each uncomfortable experience gradually strengthens your resilience, making previously daunting challenges increasingly manageable. This principle of intentional hardship forms the cornerstone of what Goggins calls taking souls, exceeding expectations to such a degree that you fundamentally change how others perceive you, and more importantly, how you perceive yourself. The metaphor comes from his military experiences, where outworking everyone around him not only earned respect, but permanently altered his self-concept. Taking souls isn't about competition with others, but about systematically destroying your own limiting beliefs through performance that contradicts them. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins illustrates these concepts through extraordinary personal stories that demonstrate both the methodology and its results. He recounts losing 106 pounds in less than 3 months to qualify for SEAL training, completing 3 hell weeks, including 2 after suffering a broken leg, finishing the brutal Badwater 135 ultramarathon despite having no formal running training, and setting a world record by completing 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours despite torn calluses that left him bleeding for hours. These achievements serve not as boasts, but as evidence for his central argument, that humans consistently underestimate their capabilities and retreat from discomfort far before reaching true limits. Goggins frames his accomplishments not as the feats of someone with special talents or advantages, but as the natural result of a mindset that refuses to accept conventional limitations and embraces suffering as the pathway to growth. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Goggins' philosophy is what he calls the cookie jar, a mental repository of your toughest moments and greatest achievements that you can draw upon during times of doubt or challenge. The cookie jar concept acknowledges that motivation isn't constant and that everyone faces moments of weakness. By intentionally cataloging your victories, especially those that required pushing through significant adversity, you create a resource to tap into when facing new obstacles. This practice transforms past suffering from something merely endured into a valuable asset that fuels future accomplishments. The harder the victory, the more powerful it becomes in your cookie jar. This reframing of difficulty represents one of Goggins' most profound insights, that our greatest struggles, properly understood, become our greatest strengths. The cookie jar concept connects to another key element of Goggins' approach, what he calls taking the governor off. He uses the analogy of a car governor, a device that artificially limits a vehicle's speed well below its mechanical capabilities. Goggins argues that most people live with a mental governor installed, artificially constraining their efforts and ambitions based on socially conditioned ideas about what's reasonable, safe, or appropriate. Removing this governor involves consciously identifying these artificial limitations and systematically challenging them. This might mean setting goals that seem objectively unreasonable, working at intensities others consider excessive, or continuing through pain that would cause most people to quit. The governor concept explains why Goggins frequently pushed himself to extreme limits that appeared reckless to outside observers. He was deliberately removing artificial constraints to discover his true capabilities. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins emphasizes that his methods aren't about achieving external markers of success like wealth, fame, or status. Instead, he focuses on the concept of mastering oneself through what he calls the war, the ongoing internal battle against comfort, complacency, and self-imposed limitations. This framing shifts the focus from external achievements to internal victory, making his approach relevant regardless of one's specific goals or circumstances. This internal focus distinguishes Goggins' philosophy from much of performance literature. While he certainly achieved external success by conventional standards, he maintains that the real achievement was overcoming his own weaknesses and limitations. The transformative power comes not from medals, records, or recognition, but from proving to yourself that you're capable of far more than you previously believed. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of Goggins' approach is his concept of embracing failure. Rather than seeing failure as something to avoid, he actively seeks situations where failure is likely because these represent the richest opportunities for growth. This perspective transforms failure from something shameful into valuable feedback that identifies weaknesses requiring attention. Goggins illustrates this concept through his experience repeatedly failing the SEAL training pull-up test. Rather than becoming discouraged, he installed a pull-up bar in his room and began doing hundreds of pull-ups daily, eventually turning this weakness into one of his greatest strengths. This approach, identifying failures and attacking them directly rather than avoiding them, becomes a template for continuous improvement. The methodology extends to what Goggins calls armoring your mind, a concept that goes beyond merely developing mental toughness to actively preparing for inevitable obstacles and setbacks. Drawing from military training, he advocates visualizing and mentally rehearsing the worst-case scenarios you might encounter, creating contingency plans, and developing specific strategies for managing difficulty before it arrives. This mental armoring transforms how you experience challenges when they occur. Rather than being blindsided by unexpected obstacles, you've already mentally rehearsed overcoming them. This preparation doesn't eliminate pain or difficulty, but changes your relationship to it, converting what might be overwhelming in the moment into an anticipated challenge for which you're already prepared. One particularly powerful tool Goggins introduces is the challenge log, a systematic way to document your journey through difficult experiences. The log serves multiple purposes: creating accountability, preserving lessons learned, measuring progress, and contributing to your mental cookie jar. By documenting both struggles and triumphs, you create an objective record of your growth that contradicts the mind's tendency to discount progress or forget past achievements. The challenge log includes not just what happened but the emotions experienced, obstacles encountered, and strategies employed. This detailed accounting transforms difficult experiences from something merely endured into something studied and leveraged. Over time, this practice builds not just resilience but strategic self-knowledge, an understanding of your specific patterns, weaknesses, and effective coping mechanisms. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins emphasizes that his approach isn't about achieving perfection but about the relentless pursuit of improvement. He introduces the concept of the accountability cycle, a continuous process of setting ambitious goals, giving maximum effort, analyzing performance honestly, identifying weaknesses, and beginning again with even higher standards. This cycle never ends, regardless of achievement level, ensuring continuous growth rather than complacency. This perspective on perpetual improvement connects to what Goggins calls sustaining greatness, which he distinguishes from temporarily achieving impressive results. Many people can summon extraordinary effort for short periods or specific goals, but sustaining high performance requires systematizing the process rather than relying on sporadic motivation or temporary inspiration. The accountability cycle provides this system, creating a framework for ongoing evolution rather than episodic achievement. One of the most thought-provoking aspects of Goggins' philosophy is his concept of uncommon among uncommon. He argues that even in elite environments, Whether special operations military units, competitive athletics, or high-performance organizations, most people eventually settle for being merely good enough to belong rather than continually pushing boundaries. Being uncommon among uncommon means refusing to use the achievements of your peer group as your standard, instead competing only against your own potential. This concept addresses the human tendency to calibrate effort based on those around us, relaxing once we've reached or slightly exceeded the norm in our environment. Goggins rejects this comparative approach to performance, arguing that true fulfillment comes only from competing against your own potential rather than external benchmarks. This internal standard is infinitely demanding but also liberating, freeing you from the constraints of conventional expectations. The uncommon among uncommon mindset connects to another key principle, the most powerful weapon. Throughout his journey, Goggins discovered that mindset, the way you interpret challenges, setbacks, and suffering, ultimately determines what you can achieve and endure. He argues that proper mental framing converts obstacles from barriers into opportunities and transforms suffering from something to avoid into a necessary pathway to growth. This perspective doesn't deny or minimize pain but changes its meaning. Physical discomfort, exhaustion, disappointment, and failure aren't signs to retreat but essential components of the process, necessary friction that creates mental calluses and expands capabilities. With this framing, suffering becomes purposeful rather than pointless, something to lean into rather than escape. Goggins illustrates this principle through his ultramarathon experiences, particularly races where he faced serious medical issues including kidney failure, broken bones, and extreme dehydration. Rather than interpreting these as signs to stop, he reframed them as the exact conditions needed to discover his true limits. This reframing didn't make the pain disappear, but gave it purpose, converting suffering from something merely endured into something actively utilized. This relationship with suffering connects to what Goggins calls the empowerment of disadvantage. Drawing from his own background of poverty, abuse, learning disabilities, and racism, he argues that disadvantages, properly utilized, can become powerful advantages by developing rare resilience and determination. Rather than using difficult circumstances as excuses, he advocates leveraging them as motivation and training ground for uncommon mental toughness. This perspective fundamentally challenges the victim mentality that Goggins admits he initially embraced. Without denying the reality or unfairness of disadvantages, he argues that allowing them to define your potential only compounds their damage. By contrast, using disadvantages as fuel creates a unique type of power unavailable to those with easier paths. This reframing converts what appears to be a liability into an asset that can drive extraordinary achievement. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins acknowledges that his extreme approach isn't for everyone and may not be appropriate in all contexts. He distinguishes between productive suffering that drives growth and pointless suffering that merely causes damage. The key difference lies in purpose and progression. Productive suffering serves specific development goals and gradually increases in intensity, while pointless suffering lacks direction and appropriate scaling. This distinction is important because it differentiates Goggins' methodology from mere masochism or recklessness. While his approach certainly embraces discomfort to an unusual degree, it does so strategically rather than arbitrarily. The goal isn't suffering for its own sake, but deliberately using controlled adversity to develop specific mental and physical capabilities. One of the most applicable aspects of Goggins' philosophy is his concept of everyday tasks as mental training. He argues that mundane activities, waking up early, completing household chores, fulfilling work responsibilities, can serve as valuable opportunities to practice mental discipline when approached with the right mindset. By bringing maximum effort and focus to ordinary tasks, you develop habits of excellence that transfer to more significant challenges. This perspective transforms daily life from something separate from your development into an integral part of it. Rather than compartmentalizing growth into specific training sessions or challenges, everyday experiences become opportunities to practice mental toughness, attention to detail, and maximum effort. This integration ensures continuous development rather than episodic improvement. Goggins also addresses what he calls the comfort trap, the natural human tendency to seek increasing ease and convenience. He argues that while comfort feels good temporarily, it gradually diminishes capacity by reducing the friction necessary for growth. The more you organize life around avoiding discomfort, the less capable you become of handling inevitable challenges when they arise. The antidote to this trap is scheduled suffering, deliberately incorporating challenges and discomfort into your regular routine rather than avoiding them. This might include early morning workouts, regular fasting, cold exposure, or tackling difficult projects first rather than postponing them. By voluntarily embracing controlled discomfort, you maintain and expand your capacity for handling life's unavoidable difficulties. Throughout the book, Goggins emphasizes the importance of what he calls building your foundation before attempting extreme challenges. While his own journey includes remarkable feats, he stresses that these began with fundamental habits, consistent workouts, improved nutrition, regular study, and basic discipline. Before extraordinary achievement comes extraordinary consistency in ordinary things, creating the platform from which bigger challenges become possible. This foundation-first approach counters the common desire for dramatic transformation without fundamental preparation. Goggins acknowledges making this mistake himself, sometimes attempting challenges before establishing sufficient foundations, leading to setbacks that could have been avoided. His hard-earned wisdom emphasizes progressive development rather than skipping necessary stages in pursuit of impressive goals. One particularly nuanced aspect of Goggins' philosophy is what he calls the truth about motivation. Contrary to much self-help literature that emphasizes feeling good and staying positive, he argues that motivation is unreliable and that depending on positive emotions to sustain effort inevitably leads to inconsistency. Instead, he advocates developing what he calls driven consistency, the ability to execute regardless of emotional state or external circumstances. This perspective doesn't deny the value of motivation, but recognizes its limitations as a primary driver of sustained performance. In Goggins' approach, discipline and commitment take precedence, with strategies like the cookie jar serving as backup systems for those inevitable moments when motivation falters. This realistic approach acknowledges human psychological reality while providing practical methods to overcome its limitations. Goggins also addresses what he calls the accountability trap, the tendency to externalize responsibility for both failures and successes. He argues that while external factors certainly influence outcomes, attributing results primarily to circumstances beyond your control creates a mindset that undermines agency and development. By contrast, taking extreme ownership, even of situations partially created by external factors, keeps the focus on what you can influence rather than what you cannot. This accountability extends to how Goggins views both failure and success. He cautions against both excessive self-criticism that becomes destructive and inflated self-congratulation that breeds complacency. The balanced approach involves honest acknowledgement of shortcomings without self-condemnation, and recognition of achievements without allowing them to become excuses for relaxed standards. One of the most profound elements of Goggins' philosophy is what he calls finding your purpose. Rather than approaching purpose as something to discover externally, he suggests it emerges through the process of overcoming significant challenges. By pushing through meaningful difficulty, you develop clarity about your capabilities and values that naturally reveals purposeful direction. This perspective inverts the common approach of seeking purpose before committing to difficult action. Goggins argues that purpose often follows rather than precedes challenging commitment, that by pushing yourself beyond conventional limits, you discover what truly matters to you and what you're capable of contributing. This experiential approach to purpose avoids the paralysis that often accompanies the search for perfect clarity before beginning. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins emphasizes that his methodology isn't primarily about physical development but mental transformation. While his story includes remarkable physical feats, these serve mainly as tangible manifestations of mental qualities, determination, resilience, strategic thinking, and unwavering self-belief that can be applied in any domain. The physical challenges provide visible evidence of otherwise invisible mental development. This focus on mental rather than merely physical toughness makes Goggins' approach relevant regardless of physical capability or specific goals. The principles of accountability, pushing beyond perceived limits, embracing necessary discomfort, and persistent self-improvement apply equally to artistic creation, intellectual pursuits, relationship development, professional achievement, or personal growth. One particularly valuable aspect of Goggins' approach is his concept of the growth timeline. He emphasizes that meaningful development occurs over extended periods rather than through overnight transformations. His own journey from overweight, academically struggling young man to elite performer spanned years of consistent effort, with countless setbacks and recalibrations along the way. This realistic timeline counters the instant result expectations fostered by much of contemporary culture. Goggins acknowledges that meaningful change is necessarily gradual, requiring patience and persistence through plateaus, setbacks, and periods where progress isn't visibly apparent. This long-term perspective provides essential context for maintaining effort when immediate results aren't forthcoming. Throughout the book, Goggins addresses what he calls the recovery component, the necessary balance between intense challenge and appropriate recuperation. While his approach certainly emphasizes pushing limits, he acknowledges learning through sometimes painful experience that sustainable high performance requires strategic recovery periods. Without adequate restoration, performance eventually deteriorates regardless of mental toughness or commitment. This balanced perspective distinguishes Goggins' mature philosophy from simplistic, more is better, approaches to development. He emphasizes quality and strategic intensity over mere volume, having learned through experience that optimal growth occurs through well-structured challenge cycles rather than constant maximum exertion. This nuance prevents interpreting his message as endorsing reckless overexertion or ignoring biological necessities. One of the most distinctive aspects of Goggins' philosophy is his concept of earned victories. He argues that achievements gained through genuine struggle and sacrifice provide satisfaction and confidence unavailable through easier paths. By contrast, accomplishments that come too easily or through shortcuts fail to build the same level of self-belief or provide comparable fulfillment. This perspective fundamentally challenges contemporary emphasis on efficiency and optimization. While Goggins certainly advocates strategic approach and intelligent training, he maintains that some benefits can only be accessed through genuine struggle. The difficulty isn't merely an obstacle to the reward, but an essential component of what makes the achievement valuable on a psychological level. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins emphasizes what he calls the self-discussion component, the ongoing internal dialogue that either supports or undermines your efforts. He advocates developing conscious awareness of this inner conversation and deliberately shifting it from limiting narratives toward empowering ones, rather than eliminating the negative voice entirely, which he considers unrealistic. He suggests developing a stronger counter-narrative based on past evidence of overcoming challenges. This approach to internal dialogue acknowledges both psychological reality and the power of deliberate mental framing. The negative voice doesn't disappear with development, but is gradually overshadowed by a more powerful voice grounded in actual experience of transcending perceived limitations. This realistic perspective avoids simplistic, positive thinking, approaches while still harnessing the power of productive mental framing. One particularly nuanced element of Goggins' philosophy is what he calls strategic dissatisfaction. He distinguishes between destructive self-criticism that undermines confidence and productive dissatisfaction that drives continued growth. The key difference lies in how the dissatisfaction is framed and utilized, whether it generates hopelessness or serves as fuel for specific improvement efforts. This balanced approach prevents both the complacency that can come from excessive self-satisfaction and the paralysis that can result from overwhelming self-criticism. Goggins advocates maintaining what he calls a positive dissatisfaction, appreciation for progress already made combined with clear-eyed recognition of the distance still to travel. This tension creates sustainable drive without destructive psychological effects. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins acknowledges what he calls the evolution component, the way his approach has developed and refined through experience over time. The methods he advocates aren't presented as perfect from inception, but as the product of extensive trial, error, and recalibration based on results. This evolutionary perspective gives his methodology credibility while allowing for continued refinement rather than dogmatic adherence. This openness to evolution extends to how Goggins views the application of his principles by others. Rather than prescribing exact replication of his methods, he emphasizes understanding the underlying principles and adapting them to individual circumstances, capabilities, and goals. The specific challenges will differ based on context, but the principles of accountability, pushing beyond perceived limits, and strategic discomfort remain consistent. One of the most powerful aspects of Goggins' approach is what he calls the legacy mindset, considering how your efforts and example might influence others beyond your immediate achievements. He discovered that his public displays of extreme perseverance inspired others to challenge their own perceived limitations, creating impact beyond his personal accomplishments. This perspective transforms achievement from merely personal victory into potential service to others. By demonstrating what's possible through relentless effort regardless of starting point, Goggins provides evidence that can help others break through their own self-imposed limitations. This additional dimension of meaning adds motivation beyond personal accomplishment, particularly during the most challenging portions of any significant endeavor. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins emphasizes the practical application of his principles through what he calls challenges, specific actionable exercises designed to develop particular aspects of mental toughness. These challenges progressively build capacity, beginning with fundamental accountability and gradually advancing toward more demanding tests of perseverance, strategic thinking, and self-mastery. These practical challenges transform the book from merely inspirational narrative into actionable methodology. They include exercises like the accountability mirror, having brutally honest conversations with yourself about your current reality, the cookie jar, documenting past victories to draw upon during difficult moments, taking souls, exceeding expectations to change perceptions, and the 40% rule, pushing beyond initial perceived limits to access untapped capacity. Goggins concludes the book by addressing what he calls the ongoing nature of the war, the recognition that development never reaches a final destination, but continues throughout life. Even after achieving elite status in multiple domains, he maintains the same fundamental approach, identifying weaknesses, attacking them directly, continuously raising standards, and refusing complacency regardless of external validation or achievement. This perspective provides both challenge and reassurance, challenge in its implication that the work never ends, and reassurance that struggles aren't signs of failure but natural components of continuous growth. By framing development as a lifelong journey rather than a destination, Goggins creates a sustainable approach that accommodates both remarkable achievement and inevitable setbacks within a coherent overall framework. Throughout Can't Hurt Me, Goggins offers an unflinchingly honest assessment of both the costs and benefits of his extreme approach. He acknowledges the physical toll, social complications, and personal sacrifices his methods sometimes required. Rather than presenting a sanitized account, he details injuries, relationship challenges, and moments of doubt that accompanied his journey, providing a complete picture of what his path entailed. This transparency allows readers to make informed decisions about which elements of his approach to adopt or modify based on their own circumstances, capabilities, and goals. Rather than presenting his methods as universally applicable without adaptation, he provides sufficient context for thoughtful application rather than mindless imitation. This nuance prevents the potential harm that could come from uncritical adoption of extreme methods without appropriate foundation or progression. The core message of Can't Hurt Me isn't that everyone should become an ultramarathon runner or special operations soldier, but rather that most people operate at a small fraction of their true capability due to artificial mental limitations. Goggins argues that by systematically identifying and challenging these self-imposed constraints through strategic discomfort and radical accountability, virtually anyone can dramatically expand their capacity for achievement and fulfillment, regardless of their specific domain. This democratization of extraordinary performance represents perhaps the most valuable aspect of Goggins' message. Rather than attributing his accomplishments to rare talents or advantages, he maintains that his methods are available to anyone willing to embrace necessary discomfort and persistent effort. This perspective offers genuine hope not based on wishful thinking, but on a specific methodology with demonstrable results across diverse contexts. What distinguishes Can't Hurt Me from many personal development books is its unflinching honesty about both the difficulty of transformation and the ongoing nature of the struggle. Goggins doesn't promise easy solutions or overnight results, but offers something more valuable: a tested pathway to expanding human capability through deliberate challenge, radical accountability, and strategic discomfort. The journey he describes isn't easy, but provides rewards unavailable through more comfortable approaches. The ultimate power of Goggins' message lies in its potential to fundamentally transform how readers understand their capabilities and limitations. By providing both inspiring example and specific methodology, he challenges the comfortable assumptions that often constrain human achievement and offers an alternative approach based on embracing necessary discomfort as the pathway to extraordinary development. This perspective shift, properly applied, can create breakthroughs not just in specific accomplishments but in overall life trajectory. If you found value in these insights from David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth book summaries. Your engagement helps us continue creating content that distills wisdom from the world's most transformative books. Also, share your thoughts in the comments below. How have you applied the concept of mental toughness in your own life? Which of Goggins' principles resonates most strongly with your experience? We'd love to hear about your journey of pushing beyond perceived limitations and developing greater resilience through challenge.